I ask you to bear in mind three things. Firstly, change is here to stay. It is something we have to be ready to adapt and to adopt and to move forward with. Change should be our friend. Most of our aerospace industry relies on the fact that things are going to change, because if they don't, we'll run out of things to do pretty darn quickly. And thirdly, the man or woman in the loop is still the most important aspect of warfare. Go on without any more.
Well, not for the first time. That's the speech done by the person introducing you. Thanks, Stephen. As I said, that is not the first time that has happened. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you very much for welcoming me to the Society. I can say I'm surprised, firstly, that you let a Royal Marine in through the door. And secondly, that there are still some serving officers in the room. Firstly, because they've listened to me banging on an almost daily basis for the last year I've been in post. And secondly, names have been taken, that they got away from work early enough to come here and talk. Stephen again slightly stole my thunder, because I have to confess, as a Royal Marine, I wasn't as well acquainted with Sir Sidney Camm as perhaps I should have been. So I did do a little bit of research, and as Stephen says, you know, an incredible man delivering hugely pivotal results over a really tumultuous period. And the fact that he was able to contribute to the design of that aircraft, and then contribute to the design of a future aircraft which is about as far removed as a system as that, and yet play such a pivotal role in both, is clearly a measure of the man who has given his name to this lecture. And there's a huge parallel, I think, in what I hope the point I make is that we are about to enter, indeed we're in the foothills of a tumultuous era, and it is those who are able to innovate, to embrace change, to recognise opportunities, to judge risks effectively in that period that will prevail. And there isn't a rule book. You know, we're in new territory in technological terms and cultural terms. There isn't something, a doctrinal handbook that one can refer to. It's about dealing and responding to what you see. That's what he did, and I think that is what we need to do. I'm actually, that's a slightly misleading title, or it's very accurate if you widen the definition of multi-domain to its further aspects. What I think I'm going to be talking about are what are the challenges facing today's militaries in order to retain the comparative advantage that allows them to succeed on the battlefield and beyond. And embracing multi-domain warfare as part of that is going to be key to it. I'm not really, and I'm going to sense the disappointment in the room, I'm not really going to talk about air power particularly, or aircraft particularly. Just so you don't think that I'm being biased, I'm not going to talk about ships either, or tanks. I'm going to talk about the symbiotic effect of leveraging all our capabilities. And take it from me, I am a huge advocate, often a first-hand recipient of the benefits of air power. But instead, I want to make the point that the most successful militaries are those that are balanced in capability terms and comfortably embedded in both alliances and with their own societies. And where I may surprise you is that I'm going to focus on that last bit perhaps a little bit more than a compatriot of mine 5–10 years ago might have done. It would be wrong not to just have a quick 2 minutes on the issue of the moment, that of the terrorist attacks in both Manchester and London, which I can confirm from the inside has been dealt with superbly by both the security service and the police. And you will have noticed perhaps more prominent military contribution than we have been used to seeing, particularly after the Manchester bombing, when we deployed troops on the streets. To be clear, and I hope you picked this up in the press, that was essentially about backfilling in order to generate armed police so that they could conduct the investigation that the police and the security services deemed worthwhile. It was not about a sort of a need to impose additional levels of security or seeking to militarise the streets of whatever city they were on. It was about backfilling in order to generate police capacity. And it was a successful operation. It was the first time that something that we'd planned for a while was run out. It worked very well. It worked in a very quick and agile and effective way. That was important because that agility and our ability to respond meant that politicians and senior policemen were much happier to see it turned off when the need no longer existed. Had we been sort of cumbersome and a little bit slow, they may have been a little bit more reticent of turning the tap off. So that agility was really important in delivering. We didn't deploy that in the response to the London attack because the nature of the attack was different and the nature of the police investigation was different and the requirement for armed police on the streets was different. But we stand ready to be in support of the police should and let's hope it doesn't another incident come our way. There are a number of implications for this for the military. I think the idea that that the military are not a factor domestically is one that has already been scotched. I don't think it is just about party, this particular Conservative Party. I think that's here to stay. And some of the sort of ghosts of Peterloo and other parts of our deep history, I think, have been thrown away. And now there is an acceptance that the military has a role to play on the streets of the UK. I also think there's an acceptance that whilst that may be needed, that's not necessarily a good thing. And we should avoid and minimise that if we can. We directly support the police and the security forces. We've got multiple hundreds working with them on every day, both in the overt, the analysis and the covert side of life. And of course, we've got the multiple thousands involved in Optempora, which is the backfill mission that I have described. So it's a much more prominent part of defence planning than it has ever been. It's principally Army, but the Air Force and the RAF Regiment play a very prominent part in the areas where they are based, and it is truly a joint operation. The other implication, which I think is really important and starts to get after the title, is that this idea that one can distinguish or differentiate between the domestic space and one's actions overseas, I think, has gone. In today's information age, where one can instantly access what your military are doing overseas, we have to recognise that there is a linkage between the two. And in the immediate aftermath of the Manchester attack, where you'll have picked up from the press that there was a Libyan connection, again, lots of questions of us as to what we could do to secure, to determine, to bring confidence to the Libyan end of the market. We need to recognise that how we act, how we behave, how we conduct ourselves in foreign fields, and here precision bombing from the air is a really important component of this, plays directly back into the potential radicalisation agenda back home, and therefore operating with the utmost propriety and ensuring that and messaging that that is the case, so that what we're doing is better understood, is a really key part of it. So I wanted to start by giving you an update on where we are, given the proximity of the incidents, but I don't think actually it's entirely irrelevant to the issues that I am about to talk on. I suppose it would be wrong not to start with a very quick synopsis of why the world is a more dangerous and complex place. It is, I would argue, a more dangerous place than it has been for some time because of two divergent threat axes. The first is the instability that is created by the religious differences, the international disputes, the inequality, the climate change generated instability that exists at reach, which has delivered for us a heady cocktail of terrorism, organised crime, migration, and any number of other sources of instability that bridge from where they originate to often back to their home. And those are not, as they once were in the good old days of Afghanistan and Iraq, relatively self-contained with a relatively compliant, a geographically compliant adversary that you could draw a boundary around and call it a joint operating area and conduct your business within it. They are profoundly trans-regional as issues. They are profoundly interlinked as issues. Just go to northwest Syria at the moment and you'll find refugees, people smuggling, organised crime, terrorism, insurgency, international power, politics playing out, all within a sort of 10 kilometre by 10 kilometre square to the northwest of Aleppo. That is a really difficult mix, and as I say, it is all utterly interlinked. And it is not particularly or necessarily a military lead to deal with it. All those things have different leads, and we need to understand our place in relation to diplomatic leads, law enforcement leads, humanitarian leads, different forms of coalitions that need to be formed to deal with different sorts of challenges. It's a very, very complex mix. But it's a threat level which is relatively low. It's a threat that we can overmatch, but it's very divergent to the second threat axis, which is that of a growing peer, near-peer competitor, and the increased prominence of state-based challenges to the rule-based international structure. We can name the names: Russia, Iran, China, North Korea. They're not all the same. Their motivations are not all the same, but they share the quality of being or seeing themselves as disadvantaged as a result of the decades of what they consider to be US-imposed status quo, and they feel that the moment is now to push back, to extend, and to pursue the goals that they feel in different ways have been withdrawn from them as a result of that status quo. That makes for quite a difficult mix, and I'll come on to some of the challenges that are upon us as a result of dealing with both of them. In addition, you'll see I'm hopeless, by the way, at reading scripts. I've never done it. But because I was told to deliver a script, this is a script. And of course, what I'm now doing is now finding my place as I ramble. So this is not going to be a well-delivered lecture, okay? So not only am I not going to talk about aircraft, I'm not going to deliver this well. Just so as I don't disappoint at the end. I really did mean that. I think that when we examine that divergent threat axis, we need to recognise that in terms of the existential threat, the severity of that threat sits very, very squarely in the state-based threat. What I do not want to do is to overplay the likelihood or the imminence of it, but in terms of the severity and the impact of us getting that wrong, that has to be where we as defence must focus. Of course, we must continue to contribute to tackling those challenges born of instability and inequality, often directly so by confronting them in the way that our Royal Air Force are doing on a daily basis over the skies of Iraq and Syria. But I think it's incumbent upon us as a department and as a military to be the conscience of our ability to defend and deter against those types of threats without overplaying them, without being accused of doing so in order to scaremonger and make our case. And as I go into sort of national security councils and various meetings across the road, the talk is very much of the terrorist threat. The talk is very much of the instability that is created by the phenomena that I have described, and understandably so, because the political instinct is to respond to the more immediate. But we do, I think, have that responsibility to, as a department, to at least act as a conscience. Which is why I believe that we need to be serious about returning to the principal function of an armed force, which is to deter. And if there is a theme in the next however many minutes, then it will be about how we reconfigure culturally, organisationally, from a capability, from a societal perspective of how we deter. Before I do that, let's just highlight a couple of other contextual dynamics. These are serve to show that the world we live in is not only more dangerous, it is also more complex. I have a script here, but I will paraphrase it. The first is the rise of the information age and our ability to respond to it. You have, I'm sure, have been to countless lectures that expound how this makes things different, and I hope that it has landed that simply the processing ability of computers and the fact that by 2045 there will be 20,000 times more digital information available than today, that we're getting close to computers that can operate like a human brain, that if we do make the breakthrough into quantum computing, then the human brain is left well behind. And this has a profound implication now on how we conduct operations. It connects new audiences to conflicts, and this tightly binds strategy to tactics and demands that for military action to be effective, it must be conducted within the context of a cohesive and focused strategy, as well as a strong supporting narrative. A great example of this is our recent deployment of a battle group to Estonia as part of the enhanced forward presence. We, as military people, focused very much on the mechanics of getting that force to Estonia. We focused on the training program to ensure that we were maximising interoperability opportunities and the like whilst there. The reality is that the key part of that deployment was an information campaign. It was about reassuring the Baltic nations, and it was about deterring Russia from any sort of mischief. And I'm not talking, we weren't ever thinking of tanks rolling over borders, deterring them from mischief in some of the Russian communities in the Baltic states. So our success criteria is not however many people properly fed operating as effectively as they can. It's how we are doing in the information narrative, which is a contest. And go to Estonia and read the papers and look at the social media and go to Lithuania and realise what the Russians are trying to do to stir up mischief of the German deployment there. And you will realise that this is a contest that we are in, and it is an information contest. So the degree to which NATO is ready and able to match them is something that is very front and centre in our mind at the moment. We think that nationally we have the coherence to do it, but of course this is very much a NATO operation, and as much as possible we want NATO to take the lead on that. The second complicating piece, and again, I doubt anyone in this room will be a stranger to it, is the pace of technological change. And its impact on the evolving nature of warfare and therefore of deterrence. And how we adapt to those emerging technologies will define our comparative advantage. And being able to do so more effectively and more quickly than one's potential adversaries will be a huge advantage, edge, and will play a massive role in deterrence. You know the sorts of capabilities I'm talking about: cyber, satellite and other space capabilities, novel weapons, artificial intelligence, biomaterial sciences, and automated systems. We have to keep abreast of those. We have to invest in those. We have to choose our moment and leap at the moment where those technologies rightly make the leap from research and development into capability. We need to choose our partners very carefully in developing those capabilities, because we don't want them widely held by others. And we need to consider the doctrine for their use. We need to think through how those technologies will play out in deterrence, because without a rule book, there's no point in having a capability in the first place. And when you get into, we've got doctrines for armoured warfare, we've got doctrines for air power, we haven't got doctrines for some of these things that are coming in. We haven't got an awareness of what the decision-making associated with its employment might be. And there's an area there that we need to focus on. So, modern deterrence. I do want to spend a little on deterrence and examine the changing nature of deterrence in the 21st century. The principles haven't really changed. We define deterrence as a relationship in which potential aggressors know that any benefits they seek to gain by attacking us and our allies will be outweighed by the consequences. So as a concept, its principles endure. But with the ever-changing political context and rapidly developing technologies, its practice needs to adapt and remain agile. Now, there are still only two essentially distinct deterrent strategies: the denial of benefit and the imposition of cost, by which I mean the threat of punishment. But these need to be placed in the contemporary technological, digital and geopolitical context, and it's what we call modern deterrence. I hope it's a phrase that you get to hear more of. It was in the SDSR without being truly defined. We want it to be at the heart of national security strategy into the future. Its key components are, firstly, coherence and solidarity. Now, these have always been vital components of deterrence, perhaps now more than ever. But in today's world of instant, ubiquitous information, a common approach across government and between governments is essential, because inconsistencies and varying levels of commitment will be exploited. For the UK, the importance of NATO in our deterrence approach cannot be overstated. It may have its occasional frustrations and shortcomings, but as an organisation that can harness the collective will of now 29 nations, Montenegro having now acceded, I hope everyone picked that up, it is unparalleled. It is unparalleled from a blue force perspective, and it's unparalleled from a red force perspective. Russia fears the collective will of NATO more than it fears anything else. Now, part of making sure that it is effective will be to improve NATO's ability to operate in this information space, in this rapidly evolving age. And we're pushing, the UK are pushing very strongly in Brussels with the support of a number of allies and member nations to secure that change, particularly in places like JFC Brunson, JFC Naples and SHAPE.